Hey, and welcome to this week where we're going to be looking at cultural constructs. So, things that aren't necessarily biological or genetic or universal, but that our culture creates. So, this week we're looking at gender, ethnicity, and nationality. So, what it means to be Italian, what it means to be Israeli, what it means to be male, what it means to be female. And I start off with this week with a weird quote that my father always used to say: real men don't eat quiche. I have no idea where this comes from, but my dad used to say it all the time. Um, that being said, the high protein thing is kind of in right now, so maybe real men do eat quiche right now. But that kind of gets to our idea of food and gender. So what I want you to do is kind of not think, let just your instincts or your cultural prescriptions kind of answer these questions. And I want you to tell me who eats these things. Steak, salad, souffle, wings and beer. And what you may have done or may not have done as you went through those is kind of assign, even without thinking about it, a gender assignment to those things. Men eat steak, women eat salad, women eat yoplait, men eat wings and beer. And what I want you to do is now step back and say, why do we assign those gender identifications to those food? And before we do that, you have to understand what kind of gender is, because gender is not sex. Um, Male, female is kind of, yeah, that's kind of boy, girl is kind of the sex thing. Gender is the cultural construct of that. So this has nothing to do with sex, nothing to do with anatomy. It's a cultural construct. And how do we know that it's a cultural construct? Well, because it has nothing to do with biology and it is not universal. So, to give you a sense of that, if you look at the role of the front of the house, who serves tables? Who is the waiter or the waitress? That is not a universal. That actually very much differs by um, the kind of exclusiveness of your establishment and the country in which you work. So, when I was traveling in Turkey, I never was served by a female. It was always a male because that's a very public role. That's a very kind of front of the house, in your face role. All of our waiters were male, um, or men. And in Italy, the same thing, especially when you're in a more exclusive establishment. That is a very professional male role. I don't remember a single female server. Where you come into the United States, especially in places that are maybe a little less exclusive, diners, kind of our family restaurants, serving is a very female role. But as you move up through the economic ladder and you become a more exclusive establishment, you'll see that turn into a male role, or you'll have more and more men in that role. Where, and then you'll get into some exclusive establishments, and that is entirely a male role. You go into the back of the house, into the kitchen, and that's almost exclusively a male world. And females will talk about how tough it is to make it as a woman in the back of the house because it's such a male dominated world. So that's where you see us creating these non universal rules for gender and food. And who eats what, who controls what. Um, Gender in this quote is a costume or a mask or a straitjacket in which men and women dance their unequal dance. So, what are we expected to do as men and women? What kind of roles are we expected to play? Um, as we look at this week in terms of food and gender, and I'm asking you to do certain things, what I'd ask you to just do is not make judgment calls or actually look for this stuff, but just be more aware. How do I see men and women acting around food? What are their food roles? How does food and our food systems, how do they reinforce and replicate and validate men and women in terms of roles? Who carves your Thanksgiving turkey? Who cooks your Thanksgiving turkey? All of those things are kind of things that we want to just notice. Um, what we want to say about food and gender is that they're constant in terms of they're always, they might be pervasive, but our traditions often reinforce them. And an entire foodway can be loaded. What I mean by that is when you look at who wrangles the meat, who's in the cowboy thing, and then moving up through the butcher, those were very male dominated roles. When you look at who actually prepares most of our food throughout the year, that's often a female kind of, in terms of our homes, that's often a female sphere. But then you move that into the professional world, and most of our professional chefs are male. So what's up with that? In the private world, that's a female role. In the public world, that's almost exclusively a male role. So it's that kind of a thing that I just want you to be aware of this week. Um, so for this week, I want you to be looking at a food or food system that's gendered and explain why. I want you to be really specific here. I don't want you just thinking about men and women. I want you really looking at um, bar, going into the back of the house, thinking about meat, thinking about salads, thinking about the diet food industry, thinking about really a specific food specifically, or food system. And then for this week's post, I want you to really go out and watch and look for gender roles. Watch for people playing gender roles, both in the context of the restaurant or the establishment in which you're sitting, and then the customers, and are they playing gender roles? If you don't see anything, that's fine, but just make sure you're watching both the customers and the establishment itself. Hopefully, this will be fun and enlightening, and then we'll be able to make some parallels into gender and identity.